Hi, this is Michael Brew talking to you about Photoshop Part 2. In Lesson 1, we're talking about creating raster graphics. Photoshop is not just for taking prepared images that you took with your digital camera and correcting them. Within Photoshop now you can actually create raster graphics. So in this Lesson 1, we'll be drawing with using brushes. We'll look at how you can take different lines and different brushes and create the image. We'll also talk about how you can create for yourself tool presets so that all the tools that you need to create that raster graphic are all in one place. In Lesson 2, we look at the vector side of Photoshop. Many people think of Photoshop as being a program that only works with rasters or those little pixels. But there are vector tools inside of Photoshop. You can use those vector tools not only to create images, like you would do inside of Illustrator. And a good prerequisite to Photoshop Part 2 is an Illustrator Part 1 class. Because the vector tools and the whole concept of vectors, though discussed briefly, a good understanding of vectors before you come into Photoshop is always very helpful. So we use those vector tools not only to create images, but also to do vector selections. Focusing in on the pen tool and also the pencil tool of Photoshop, we look at ways that we can create images and select parts of raster graphics using vector tools so that we have a nice, sharp selection of the object. And then using those to create masks, vector masks, so that if we have to take parts of the image out, we can take it out in a nice, clean way. It also will be how you could increase the size of that image using the vector techniques and get a nice resize. Lesson 3 focuses in on how we can make some corrections or some effects to the image by using layer effects, by using filters, and the difference between your layer effect and your filter, of course, the layer effect can be changed later on, where the filter permanently changes the actual pixels. We'll also look at smart art objects, which come from Illustrator or from other Adobe products. We'll focus in on the fact that you can mask by using both the layer effects and the filters and the vector tools that we talked about in Lesson 2. And then we'll focus in how we can take these effects and we can put them across the entire image, or we can focus layer by layer. Lesson 4 talks about working with actions inside of Photoshop, how we can automate processes. In the Microsoft world, they call it macros. In the Adobe world, we call it actions. By automating these different tasks, it makes it so that we can take those repetitive tasks and have Photoshop actually go through step by step and perform those tasks. You can do parts of the actions, which is called a droplet. Or we can take all of the actions, have them repeated over and over and over again for every image in a file, which would be called creating for yourself a batch. The last lesson of Part 2 is dealing with video. Many people look at Photoshop and do not see it as a video tool. Well, what program is better at working with individual images than Photoshop? And we know video is just rapid images going across at a certain amount of frames per second. So you can take your video and you could brighten it up using the brightening tools inside of Photoshop. Or you could take part of the image and clone it. So if you needed additional subjects within your video, you could clone people in, and they would be in each individual frame. So we look at how we can create that video, we can edit the video, and then we could render that video out so that it could then be used within whatever media program you'd like to use it in. Well, this has been Michael Brew talking you through Photoshop Part 2. If you have any additional questions, contact your account executive or your career consultant, which will answer any additional questions you have about Photoshop. We hope to see you in class.